Hello there. This is going to be a build tutorial for the camera grid sequence. So as you can see here, I generated this artwork. I did this with another tool that I created and was recently put on Blender Market, which is called the image from icons or image from symbols. There are two versions that you can use. And what you can create is an image from all these tiny symbols. And there is then a lot of detail in these images. I used to work for a company who did these kind of things for wall art. And then you get really big files with a lot of detail. And sometimes Blender wasn't able to render it. So that's why I created this tool to create a camera sequence that will jump over the image and it chops the image up in pieces. So as we go in, here we have the geometry node, and when we go to cameras and I turn off this image, go into preview mode, here you can see we have 9 squares, or actually 10 because the first index is 0, of course. And when we go to the parameters, we can see the camera is over here at place 0. And when we click here, we can set the camera position by frame. So if we jump the frames, you see that the camera switches between these squares. So if we could jump into the camera, like center it, then we can see if we go back, it will jump and will take the exact square and it will link up. If you put them into Photoshop, like they will all link up together. This is a procedural thing, so you can set the amount of squares that you want. So maybe you need more rows, or need less rows in this direction. You see here is being calculated how many you need. So now it's going to 11, so you have to set your sequence animation to 11, and then when you play it you see the camera jump around. When we go into our camera and we play it, you see that it jumps between the numbers. When I turn on the image, now it's going outside of the border because it needs to be 5. Here you can see that it will render the sequence. You can also do it by index, and then here you can click if you need a particular square or want to check up on it. But standard, it's by frame. You can also change the size. So if you want to have bigger squares, you can set it to 2. And as you see now, the square of the camera is too small. So you have to set also the camera. If we go into the camera here, set this orthographic scale to 2, then it will line up perfectly again. So you have to set the camera scale as well as the geometry node scale, the X and Y. You can also go, because now I make a square, you can set a different proportion, and then you have to take into account also the resolution. So if you make it twice the width, you have to do the Y twice the width, and also in the camera set the scale, and then it will work. But in squares it's a lot easier. So if we have this, and for example we have set our place to set the renders, we set them to JPEGs. If we render now, let's see, we have 9, so it needs to be back to 9. If we render now in Eevee, render animation, it's going to go over all these images. Right over here we have all our images that you can link up together. Now there's still borders and the numbers, but you can toggle the info. If you turn off this info, render it again, there we go, it goes quite quickly. You see here that my image isn't big enough to show all the detail. That's just an example. Here you see all the images without the numbers. So you can toggle the info and take it away. and then you can render really big images. So if we go into the geometry nodes here, let's show our grid at the top here, turn off the image. What you first need to do when I turn these two things off, go out of the camera, and I set my cursor to the middle with Shift S, I can do that. We have to create a plane and go into edit mode with tab, then scale with S, then press 0. Now all four vertices are in the middle at 0. Then we do mesh, cleanup, merge by distance. Now I just have one vertex here, as you can see. What we can do now is add a camera and then set the rotation to 0. We have to put this camera on orthographic scale 1, as I just showed you. And now when we select the camera, then select the plane, and then do Command P. No, I have to do it the other way around. The plane and then the camera, P or Command P. We can set a vertex. So it will take the vertex and place the camera on top of that vertex. So now you see they are parented. And if I grab the vertex, grab, you see that it moves the camera. And now we can put the geometry nodes on this vertex and the camera will follow that vertex. So we already did that in our model here. So if we go into it, so here this is the geometry is the vertex and the camera is just following. As you can see, it's parented as I just showed you. And if we go into the geometry nodes, here I create a grid with a certain size and I linked it up so it will follow the size of 1, as you see here in the parameters. Then I sample the index and take the position, and I set the position of the input of the vertex, so the camera follows. And here I have a menu switch, and this switch does the scene by frame or by index, so the camera jumps around by the animation of the timeline or by the index by clicking. Then here on top I have the scene info, so I take the grid and I calculate the value, so how many there are, how many numbers there are, and then I put them in a string to curve so you can read. Here I have camera position, 10 camera positions, frame 0 to 9, and that is being calculated here. Also you can see here I take the position. What I do here is I take a grid. When I do this and make a viewer node, here we have a grid. Wireframe mode, you see all these grid lines, so it's the vertices that are being calculated. I add 1 to here because the index starts at 0. If we see the viewer node and I go to convex hull, I take away all these lines, so it just puts a box around it, and then I only have 4 indices, and I take the second one, and with the second one I transform that position. I transform the string, because if I don't do it, it's just here in the middle. And if I take the convex hull and then take the position of the second index, I project it to the top. You can see that it jumps around into the different corners, but I wanted it to be a 2. So I make it an instance. So the camera the camera only needs 1 point, and if it's not instanced, it will take all this as geometry and it sticks the camera to all these points. So that's why I created it as an instance. This is a switch to toggle the info. And here at the bottom we have more info. We can see with another viewer node. Here I take the grid, I separate the lines, into the X and Y. Here you can see how I do an X and Y selection. So it's looking if the edges are lined up with the X or Y or Z orientation. And then it takes, I separate them X and Y, and then I combine them again. So now the lines are not merged. And if you then do a mesh to curve, then you get nice straight edges. If I don't do that and I plug it in right away, it needs to be a curve, then you will see that they're not everywhere the same width. And that's what I do here with a separate geometry. I create this into instances as well, so it's not seen by the camera as geometry. And here I instance also some balls onto it, or some icospheres. So if you take these together, then you see that it looks like a nice grid. Turn off ghost view. Here it looks like a nice grid that makes visual where the lines actually are. So the camera can be lined up really nicely. Then last I have here, I do a mesh to points. So I take the faces. So in the middle of all these faces there is a point. And here I have an index visualizer, and I show the index on the middle or in the middle of the faces. And I transform it a little bit. If I mute this, it's a little bit up. It needs to do -100, so it's nicely in the middle. There are a lot of tutorials how to build this. This is quite complex to build. You will be busy with it for some time, but you can find a few tutorials on the web on how to create this in Blender. So that's also switched and toggled by info. And here I combine all the meshes or all the geometry together, and it creates this tool. So if we go out, it's all compressed into a node group. You can get this one for a small price on Blender Market if you don't want to build it, but you see here how you need to build it. It's not that hard if you dive into it a little bit. And then you have a really nice procedural tool to render all your images, your orthographic images or artworks in a sequence if you need to output really big files. So I hope this is useful, and I see you in the next one. Okay, bye.